WellPod at DC on Riot Radio.
From meditation, stress management, safer substance use, and sexual health, we will literally talk sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
Join us to dive deep into some student health questions. We'll learn about wellness together, try some coping tools, and meet some interesting people.
Your co-hosts, Heather and Craig.
Perfect blend of Campus Health and Wellness Center and Sal's.
Each week, we'll DIY a wellness tool together.
And then nerd out and dig into the science behind how it works.
Email your health and wellness related questions to wellpod@durhamcollege.ca to be discussed anonymously on air. Welcome to the WellPod at DC.
Welcome to the WellPod at DC, live from the Media Hub here on riotradio.ca. So there's an Irish proverb, a good laugh and a long sleep are the best cures in the doctor's book. So today we are talking all about sleep. Reminder, each week for the rest of season 3, we're going to do some deep dives into different hormones, these chemical messengers that unlock the coordination of different functions in our body. Everything from mood, hunger, memory, and today, sleep. So digging into physiology as a bit of a biohack, using this knowledge and some research insights to make some small lifestyle shifts and changes to hopefully improve our well-being. So I'd like you to get out a pen and paper or open your notes app, or if you got a good strong memory, I'm going to ask you a few questions. So this was developed by a sleep researcher, Daniel Buziz, in 2014, and it's a widely used tool for self-reporting the degree of your sleep fulfillment. So SATED, S-A-T-E-D, I'm going to ask you 5 questions, and I want you for each of these letters and each of these questions to give it either a 0 if it's rarely or never, a 1 if it's sometimes, and a 2 if it's usually or always. Ready for your first one? The S stands for satisfaction. How satisfied are you with your sleep? 0 for not very satisfied, 1 for a little bit, somewhat, and 2 for, usually always satisfied. The A stands for alertness. Do you stay awake all day without dozing off? Dozing? So 0 for rarely, never, 1 sometimes, 2 for usually, always. T stands for timing. Are you asleep or trying to go to sleep between the hours of 2 a.m. and 4 a.m.? So are you asleep between the hours of 2 a.m. or 4 a.m.? If it's never, give yourself a 0. If it's usually always, give yourself a 2. What about efficiency? Do you spend less than 30 minutes awake at night? So how often do you spend less than 30 minutes awake at night? So this includes the time it takes to fall asleep and awakenings from sleep. But what would you give yourself here? And then the D, any guesses, Craig, what the D might stand for?
Before I go to the D, though, what's the scale for that one? Sorry.
0, still 0 for never, rarely.
Okay.
So if you spend less than 30 minutes awake at night.
Then I'm a 2.
Then you're 2.
Okay. I mean, if I'm a 2, I don't want to reveal too much.
Don't reveal your secrets yet. And then the D stands for duration.
Oh, okay.
So do you sleep between 6 and 8 hours per day? So if you never sleep between 6 and 8 hours, give yourself a 0, sometimes a 1. And if you usually or always sleep between 6 and 8 hours, give yourself a 2. So 0, if you scored 0, this indicates poor sleep health. But if you rate 10, this indicates pretty good sleep health.
Yes.
So what would, if you don't mind sharing, what would your average number be there?
I'm a 10.
You're a 10.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good
But
sleeper.
that seems surprising at the same time. Sometimes, I don't know. It's just interesting. I wouldn't have thought it, but based on the scale that you shared there.
And remember, this is about kind of sleep fulfillment, right? So how fulfilled we are by a sense of sleep. So our student question of the week is, my sleep is horrible. I toss and turn all night. I was staying up late to study, but finally have the time to go to bed early. But I can't fall asleep. Should I get those expensive melatonin gummies? So today we're going to dive into what is melatonin, a little bit about sleep, and do some biohacking with sleep hygiene. So our hormone of the day is melatonin, discovered in 1958 from the pineal gland of cows expanding on the studies of skin color changes in amphibians and reptiles. So they discovered melatonin while looking at how some creatures, their skin can change color.
And then very different from a cow.
Very different from a cow.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, don't know how they got there. It wasn't used therapeutically until roughly 1995, and the name melatonin stems from its skin lightening properties, derived from Greek words melos, meaning black or dark, and tonus, meaning color or suppress. It's known as the hormone of darkness. The onset of melatonin at dusk promotes activity in nocturnal creatures, night active creatures, and sleep endural ones, including humans. Cool nature fact. In plants and bacteria, melatonin primarily serves as a defense mechanism against oxidative stress, indicating its evolutionary significance. So current research is looking at this being an environmental stress protector for our plants, involved in processes like growth regulation, photosynthesis as key functions. But for humans, what are the key functions of melatonin? Craig, tell us a little bit more about what this hormone does.
For sure. And it's very interesting hearing what you had to say about that and plants and so on. I think we'll see some overlaps with some of the things later on in terms of how it ultimately works in us as well.
Very cool.
So melatonin, as we're saying, is a hormone. And so we have a picture up on the screen there. And you mentioned the pineal gland, and it's just a tiny little gland there. It's not all of everything that's green at the back there, but just that tiny little spot sort of.
So not just cows, humans have it too.
We have it as well. You got it. And so it's that gland that's releasing that chemical melatonin, as you can see up on the right-hand side, that then we at least tend to think about as the sleep hormone, as you said, and we'll get into in a minute, as the in terms of that light and dark cycling that we go through and so on. But it's a very interesting chemical, because as much as we think about it that way, from a little bit of exploring that about it, seems to be a lot more that it potentially does, though there's more research that we need to look into and so on. But that it seems to play a role in things like protecting against neurodegeneration. So as much as it's sort of not only by itself, but interactions with other hormones, as we kind of alluded to last week in the intro to all of the different hormone episodes that we're going to chat about, but helping out in ways anyways with things like Parkinson and Alzheimer's, like that it has some sort of slowing effect to some extent of that neurodegeneration, right? So you kind of mentioned like, okay, it's playing a role in the oxidative that word role in terms of plants and the different reactions going on there. It seems to have, albeit a little bit different, but some of those same impacts in the human body as well. Seems to have, right along those lines, anti-aging properties to it. And so this was something where reading about where people had their pineal gland removed surgically for various reasons, not just for fun, but some disease or cancerous or whatever the situation is. And then it seemed to be that the patients had what was quoted an accelerated aging process. I don't know what all that entails from the articles that I was reading, but that, it seems that, okay, without the pineal gland, which is releasing melatonin, you have this accelerating aging process. So what is it doing in there to help us not age quite as quickly? Again, from what I came across, more research needed. And then doing things like in terms of cycles, like helping to regulate or support the regulation of menstrual cycles. I came across a little bit of research in terms of that as well. And so kind of bouncing off of that, melatonin, is a hormone, but then, there's differences among us. So like males versus females, and then as we go through the aging process, what's going on there in terms of how much melatonin we have or eventually might not have.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting that based on sex, that females tend to have more melatonin than males do.
See, there's a reason I'm so tired.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then age, it decreases with age. Though I came across something that was interesting, that when babies are first born, they're not actually making their own melatonin, which I didn't realize that myself. So it was that they're getting melatonin from their mom in utero, and then they're getting melatonin through breast milk.
Yeah.
And then it's not till about 2 to 3 months in that they're naturally, well, I mean, it's all natural, but they're making their own melatonin, which was kind of interesting and explains a whole lot about the lack of sleep early on in terms of babies regulating things and so on. But then what happens, we have an increase in melatonin. And if you think about, how much sleep we need and so on, typically sort of teens, by the time you get to your teens, there's a whole lot of melatonin going on there. And then kind of it sort of plateaus, if you will. I think I read about the age of 40, and then from there on out, it starts to decrease at that point as we get older. So there's this whole, if you will, pattern or rhythm cycle to things over the course of our lives as well.
Yeah.
And so then that leads to what we're talking about for the most part in terms of melatonin and these circadian rhythms that we've talked about last week, I should say. But, these are those cycles of the day, and there's various cycles, right? Physical cycles, mental cycles that we might touch upon a little bit today, behavioral cycles, but more from the physical cycle would be the melatonin, and we had the picture up before, and if the guys don't mind bringing it up, so there's also the light dark cycle that you mentioned. And so what's going on in our brains in terms of as the day progresses and goes from light to dark and back again. And so as you can see in the picture on the screen there, you have the light coming into the eye is an inhibitor of the release of melatonin. So what it does is, it's stimulating, your retina, and then there's the retino-hypothalamic tract there that's, bringing that information back into your brain to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. A lot of big words here.
Big fancy word.
But then that stimulates the pineal gland to ultimately release melatonin, to not release melatonin, I'm saying this backwards. It would stimulate the pineal gland to release melatonin, but it's being inhibited due to the light, right? And then, of course, as it gets darker over the course of the day, then there is not that inhibition due to the light, and then the suprachiasmatic nucleus is going to then stop blocking the pineal gland from actually releasing the melatonin. And so melatonin, is related to this light dark cycle and therefore related to our sleep wake cycle, right? Because at least in general, we're awake during the day when it's light outside, and then we are asleep at night, right? But then it's interesting because some of what I came across as well is we tend to think about it as this sleep hormone and that it's the sort of all about melatonin and that's it. So the question I have for you, have you ever had a nap during the day when it's still bright outside?
Absolutely.
I think we all have, right?
Yep.
Kind of a silly question, but then it's like, but it's bright out. How did you fall asleep on wherever you happen to be, right? On the couch or whatever. It's like, how'd you fall asleep? Because there's not melatonin being released because it's daytime. So there's a whole lot more going on with sleep and so on than just straight up melatonin having the control of it, right? And so, it helps us to sleep better is what the research shows. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and how our brains function a little bit later on. But it's like, when you go to bed at night, I'm going to sleep, maybe not only because of the melatonin, but it's helping that sleep be more effective, if you will. Not to, be down on naps or anything like that. I like them too, right? But then we also have other areas of our body. And so I'll ask the guys if they can get the picture up once more there, but it's to keep it sort of simple there, we have a portion, a ganglion in our body that is helping to regulate and plays a role with our sympathetic nervous system. So we've talked about that before, the fight or flight portion of our nervous system. And so it also interacts with our with the earlier parts, the pineal gland and so on, in order to affect how much melatonin is ultimately being released into our bodies. And so that's going to have it's just, we can oversimplify with, melatonin is this sleep hormone, but there's a lot of interplay among other systems, other hormones, and those kinds of things as well. And so that's a lot of physiology, kind of summarize as quick as I can there, if you will. But then, in terms of sleep, that's like sort of the physical rest, if you will, and whatnot. But then are there other types of rest beyond the physiology and what's going on in our minds there?
Yeah, and we've talked about rest in the past. So if you want to flip back to season 2, episode 8, we had an episode called Hibernation Time, Getting Cozy with Hookah. And so we mentioned how rest comes in many forms. We have emotional rest, we have mental rest, cognitive rest, social rest, one of my favorites, sensory rest. And so we had this recognition that, sleep is just one aspect of rest. It's kind of the physical manifestation of this idea of kind of our systems being able to pause or slow down. And so there's a really great 2019 TED Talk by Sandra Dalton Smith that we highlighted in that past episode, where she talks about the real reason why we're tired and what to do about it. But I talk a lot with students as a wellness coach through the Campus Health and Wellness Center about the importance of prioritizing rest. And I talk about it as being a foundational pillar for our overall health and well-being. And it's really about how we care for ourselves through rest. And so sleep is just that physical form of nourishment. And the biggest message I try to send to students is that sleep is a chemical process. So I'm going to be saying that a lot today, right? Sleep is a chemical process. And when we think about it this way, we tend to not undermine it anymore and not prioritize it anymore, because we're recognizing that, as you've been talking, there's this whole chemistry in our bodies that affects all sorts of other functions and other hormones. So let's talk a little bit about why we sleep, and maybe dive into a little bit of that. So according to the National Institute of Health, during sleep, your body is working, supporting healthy brain function, maintaining physical health, growth, and development. But a lot is still unknown about why we sleep. Science.org had a top 10 breakthrough. Every year they produce this. And so in 2013, scientists were long speculating that one of the main functions of sleep was this idea of restore and repair. But whether or not this was a core principle of sleep was kind of remaining a bit of a mystery and controversial. But in 2013, researchers found direct experimental evidence that the brain cleans itself during sleep by expanding channels between neurons with an influx of cerebral spinal, big fancy word, fluid that kind of flushes out our brain. So cool. More of this type of information is also found in Why We Sleep, Unlocking the Power of Sleep and Dreams by Matthew Walker. His 2017 book really explored these kind of biological processes that happen during sleep and really highlighted the current research looking at 3 core areas: repair, restore, and this idea of re-energizing. So re-energizing, it's kind of energy conserving. And I found a study that said it's about 8 hours that we sleep each night. That's like an energy savings of 35% of our energy. That's huge. Restoring, so our cells need some time to do some restoration, and repair, this idea of kind of waste clearance system and kind of consolidation. And we've talked in the past a little bit about neuroplasticity and the neural pruning, synapses pruning that can happen. And so maybe this is why we need sleep, is our brain kind of needs a time to do this. Craig, what are your thoughts on the purpose of sleep and what's happening with this idea of restore and repair?
Yeah, you've kind of touched upon a good bit of it there, right? In terms of a few times throughout the rest of the show, and as I prepared, it was like, energy, right? Our body is using a whole lot of energy throughout the day. And yes, we get our energy from, food and those kind of things. And are we really going to, sometimes it doesn't feel like we're really going to run out almost or whatnot, right? But it's like, there's a lot going on beyond sort of, I'll say, the physical energy that we feel of, I've got to sit down.
Yes.
But your brain is using a ton of energy. Your brain, I think the numbers, I'm not always the best with remembering numbers, but it's like 2% of your body mass is your brain, and it uses 20% of the energy that you burn in the day.
Wow.
Right? So it's like it's using a lot of energy overall. And so, building off what you said in terms of that re-energize, even just to get into this, is like, give it a break, right? Just like the rest of our body gets tired, our brain is part of the rest of our body, right? And so, plays an important role like throughout life even, and kind of going back to something I said before when we think of kids and teens and maybe how much they sleep, and when I was a teen, how much I slept as well, right? But part of that is, because we're going through a whole lot of changes as we grow from young child to teen, and various changes in terms of what all's going on in there. But it takes a lot of energy for our body to be doing a lot of that work, as much as it feels maybe behind the scenes, if you will, right? And so in terms of that, our body needs the rest you're talking about, in addition, or one aspect of that is the sleep, to say, okay, let me, sit back and you rest so that we can conserve that energy of you up and moving around to actually, dealing with these changes in the body.
Trying to grow a human here. That's kind of what I kind of picture our brain saying, right?
That's a good way of saying it, for sure. And so then also like, kind of in my brain anyways, like think about the functions of sleep to like what happens to you when you lack sleep. It kind of tells you a whole lot about the functions of sleep, right? Like a few things I jotted down or read about was, it affects how well you think, react, work, learn, right? If you've ever been real tired in a meeting and it's like, what is Craig talking about right now, right? Part of that's not because I'm rambling, but it's like, because I stayed up till 2 a.m. last night and I'm having trouble focusing or having interest, I think you said earlier, if in terms of energy for that and so on, right? Getting along with others. I will admit for me, and I'm sure most others would say this, I know that if I've, had some late nights for whatever the reason is like, I should not be around people for today because I might not be the nicest, or maybe I'll just say quicker to react or whatnot, right? Because I'm not getting enough sleep. But then even that, like physically, things that go on in terms of, our heart and cardiovascular system, what changes, respiratory system, our immune system. So you mentioned these, but not just the energy of our body in terms of maybe generalities, right? But like, think about, our immune system I'll use, right? There's a whole lot of work going on when you're sleeping, right? Sometimes I think sleeping in our minds, we associate it, especially in our more Western culture, with laziness. And there's a huge difference between those. What's going on while I sleep in terms of my immune system? It's going wild and fixing all of the things. I mean, as much as I'm being silly and it doesn't always work exactly that way, but it's doing a lot of repair there, as you mentioned, as one of the things that's going on. Because the cells now have the energy and ability to function to help fight things off or whatnot, right? You mentioned too, like the networking, we'll get into this in learning, but the re-networking and pruning of our connections in our brain. A whole lot of that goes on in our sleep. I think I might have said this last week, but I know I say it to a lot of students when you have that feeling, I got to study more and stay up later, and I'm getting ahead of myself now. But I say, do you know you do some of your best studying while you sleep? Right? Because your brain is doing all of that pruning and connecting and so on, as you mentioned. But then going to like how our body naturally functions, again, comes back to energy of when you go to sleep. It's not just like, okay, I lay down and then I kind of, have dreams or not, or whatever the case is. But it's your parasympathetic system kicks in, as we were saying before, with the sympathetic signals up to your brain potentially and stress and so on affecting that. Your parasympathetic is the calm, cool, collected portion of your body. It's sending signals to your heart. Whoa, slow down. To blood vessels, to change their size so your blood pressure goes down. Right? And that's what's happening when we're sleeping. Well, why is that happening? It's, because now the energy can go to these other things like our immune system function and so on as well. Right? And then in terms of waking, it's the opposite. Not that it's a bad thing, but our sympathetic system kicks in. Like we saw earlier, there's that impact of like, okay, sympathetic nervous system here, along with the light of the day, time to wake up. Right? But then that's also why sometimes we have effects of I can't fall asleep because of the stress, right? Your student question there, as much as I'm kind of looking at it from a different angle, but I was staying up late. Yeah, what allowed you to stay up late? All of the stress that was going on was able to get you into that rhythm. Not that it's a good rhythm, but it was that stress and that interaction, right? But some of the things then, if you think about, well, by sleeping, my parasympathetic system is slowing things down in terms of my heart and decreasing my blood pressure. Some of the chronically, in terms of like over a long time, not getting enough sleep, right? What are the issues? There, in research shows there's an increase in coronary heart disease in patients who get less sleep, an increase in blood pressure. So someone might have to get on blood pressure meds, but beyond getting on the meds leads to disease or issues down the road. Increase in obesity because of those interactions of hormone. The increase in ghrelin and leptin there is an increase in it. So now I'm hungry, and now it's throwing off my diet, and now I'm experiencing changes there, right? Increased risk for stroke as well. So there's a lot of factors going on there with, like, as much as that's the, I chronically don't get enough sleep, but like even over the short term, there's impacts on how things ultimately function. And we'll get into it later, but like mentally and learning. I kind of alluded to it already, but we'll just allude and, we'll eventually get there. But it's all stuff that shows us how important sleep is, because if we're not getting enough, bad things can happen, right? So I mentioned something about dreams there. So I'll ask you about that beyond, the melatonin. A lot of us connect dreams with sleep, right? So I did or didn't have dreams last night. What does that mean? And so are you a dreamer? Do you know anything about what it means?
I used to be a dreamer, and then I had a child, and I don't sleep anymore. Do you remember any of your dreams?
I do, but I don't actually have very many, so I'm a little nervous what you might say about dreams here and what that tells me.
I could spend a whole episode just talking about dreams. Dreams are so fascinating. And so when we think about, like, how do we define what a dream is, right, it's tricky because sometimes, I don't know if you've experienced this, but your dreams seem so potent when you first wake up, and then it's only a few minutes later and you're trying to tell someone about it, and you already start feeling this fleeting sensation of, I thought I knew those details, right? So dreaming is a succession of images, ideas, emotions, sensations that occur involuntary in our minds while we sleep. Humans spend roughly about 2 hours a night dreaming, and this the content or the function of dreams has been the topic of scientific, philosophical, and religious interests throughout history, with a whole field of dream interpretation science called orneurology. And so in ancient times, ancient societies, dreaming was considered more of a supernatural communication, a mean of divine intervention. One of my favorite kind of cultures to study is Egyptian cultures and kind of their beliefs and views around dreaming. They believe dreams function as revealers of truths from gods, and it was the best way to receive divine revelations. And so they would induce dreams. So they built sanctuaries and had whole rituals where we would drink psychedelics, lay on special dream beds, sometimes often with snakes, in the hope of receiving advice and comfort and healing from the gods. So we're not necessarily inducing sleep the same way anymore. But throughout the rest of history, we've always had this connection almost with healing and medicine and health with dreaming and sleep. So the father of modern medicine, Hippocrates, thought dreams could help us analyze and predict our diseases. Modern studies in psychology and neurobiology are really trying to understand what's happening when we're dreaming. So it's not known where in the brain dreams originate. We haven't been able to look under that orange pith and find those spots. Currently, we're thinking there's multiple regions in our brain that might be involved. And the purpose, is it of the body? Is it of the mind? So just a few of kind of my favorite areas of dreaming. Between 1940 and 1985, a man named Hall collected over 50,000 dream reports at Western Reserve University. And he published something called the Content Analysis of Dreams, outlining almost like a coding system, studying 1,000 dream reports from college students. Results indicated that participants from all parts of the world demonstrated similarity in their dream content. Craig, without looking at my screen, any guesses what the Hall studies found as the most common emotions experienced in dreams for college students?
Fear. Yeah?
Anxiety. Anxiety was number one. Sometimes people guess sexual dreams, but sexual dreams on average make up about 10% of our dreaming landscape. Some other favorites, W. Robert in 1886 thought dreams erased sensory impressions or ideas that were not fully developed. And so this incomplete material was kind of removed and suppressed or deepened into our memory during sleep. Famous Sigmund Freud disagreed and said dreams are the guardians of sleep, not its disturbers, and argued in his interpretation of dreams that dream content is disguised wish fulfillment connected to day residue, and it was our unconscious desires that were kind of sneaking up. Hartman in 1995 proposed dreams served as kind of this quasi-therapeutic function, often allowing us in a safe place to kind of process our trauma. Dreams are seen sometimes in research as maybe an aspect for learning. 2010, Harvard did a study showing experimental evidence that dreams were maybe correlated with improving our learning. But two of my favorites. In 2000, Reverionceau came up with this idea of threat simulation hypothesis. So he predicted and did some studies. During much of human evolution, physical and interpersonal threats were serious and giving reproductive advantages to those who could survive them. So dreaming is maybe aiding our survival by replicating these threats and providing the dreamer this simulation, this ability to practice dealing with them. He built on this in 2015, adding social simulation theory. And the belief is that we have these dreams for us to practice our social skills and social bonds. But I think above all, my favorite was in 2021, Eagleman and Vaughn, they came up with the defensive activation theory, which says that given the brain's neuroplasticity, dreams evolved as a visual hallucinatory activity during sleep to busy the occipital lobe.
The occipital lobe?
Yeah, to kind of like preoccupy it, to help protect it.
Interesting.
I know. So maybe we're hallucinating. Maybe our dreams are just random firing neurons in the brain. As they say, life is but a dream.
Yeah, but I think I might be learning that I don't dream much, so I don't learn much. I don't protect myself much, and okay.
Yeah. So maybe just random firing of neurons happening for you.
So then I'll have to lie in the snake beds that you mentioned.
There you go. Yeah, we'll elicit it. After this break, don't hit the snooze and join us as we continue to explore sleep back here on riotradio.ca. Welcome back to the WellPod at DC, live from the Media Hub on riotradio.ca. So during sleep, we cycle through 4 stages of sleep multiple times throughout the night, on average about 5 times for different lengths of time, a full cycle averaging between 70 and 120 minutes. So these 4 stages of sleep include 3 stages of what is called non-rapid eye movement sleep, or non-REM, NREM, and 1 stage of rapid eye movement sleep, which we refer to as REM sleep. So stage 1, this non-REM sleep that we start off with, this is when we're first falling asleep. We're very lightly starting to go into the slower mood. And then stage 2, still non-REM, but it's a little bit longer. This is where we spend most of our time at night in our sleep stage. This is still a lighter sleep, but as Craig was mentioning earlier, like our heart rate goes down, our temperature starts to go on down. Maybe something's happening in our brain that we'll get into in a few seconds. Stage 3, still non-REM. It gets shorter and shorter with each cycle, but this is our deep sleep. This is the prized possession of our whole sleep cycle. This is when we have no movement, it's restorative, and we need this in order to feel refreshed. Last but not least, that stage 4 is what we refer to as REM sleep, roughly about 90 minutes after we fall asleep. And this is where we have a little bit more rapid eye movement happening. Our body is starting to speed up again. And this is where that good old dreaming starts to happen. Craig, can you tell us a little bit more about the science of sleep and what's happening here during the REM and non-REM? What's going on in our brain?
Yeah, so part of it comes down to the anatomy of what's our brain, at least for the most part, made of, right? All of our neurons in there sending signals around to connect to other parts of the brain, to our body, and so on. And so the way that those signals are happening as far as neurons go, these are electrical signals. Right? Unlike the hormones that we're talking about being chemicals that we release out into our blood to travel around, these are along the cell itself. You have these electrical impulses, right? To then send that signal over here, to do that, to send that, etc. And so in terms of that, because it's electrical, we can actually measure it using some equipment, right? You've maybe heard of a ECG or EKG, where you put the electrodes on and see what's going on electrically in the heart. Yeah. Well, if you've ever seen where they have a cap they put on a person and there's electrodes there, this is an EEG. So an electroencephalogram. Encephalo meaning brain. And so with that, then we can monitor, well, what's going on with these electrical signals and how are things changing? And so our next image here shows some of the waves of electricity, if you will, of signaling of the neurons related to what you were talking about there in terms of the type of sleep and so on. So I'll start at the top with the beta waves, and as you can see on the right side, it's like, this is while awake. If you look at the beta waves, it kind of makes sense of, as much as it kind of looks like they're all over the place, but that's because, we're moving around through our day thinking about various things, connecting information and so on. Our brains are quite active, right? Then we have the alpha waves. They're a little bit slower there and so on. And that's because this is while I'm relaxing, trying not to think about much, or I'm, feeling a little bit sleepy. Perhaps I'm, like you said, maybe that early on phase of getting ready to sleep anyways, of I'm reading my book before bed, whatever the case is, right? Or even, having a nap on the couch, whatever the case. And so then you move into the theta and then eventually the delta waves, which are related to those stages that you were talking about, where the waves are quite slow there. Again, it kind of comes back to what we were saying before about energy, right? Not to say that your brain is not doing a lot while sleeping in a way, but what is it doing? It's not paying attention to all of the incoming sensory information. You're asleep, but it's processing various things that have gone on, or dealing with a dream that's helping you protect yourself in the future, or whatever the case is, right? So these are some of the 4 major waves there. But then there was another one that, as much as it's not in that picture there, I came across, which is the gamma wave. And so the gamma wave would actually be in that picture over the beta sorry, I'm getting them wrong, over, the beta, I second guess myself there, but the beta wave, it would be even more active, but it's associated with very focused concentration.
Ooh.
So if I'm working on something that I need to put my full focus into, let's say you're trying to learn something, right? This would be something that now your brain is producing gamma waves. They're really hard to measure. And so like sort of as I was researching this, how come the gamma aren't in there? They're hard to actually measure in somebody. But like I said, it tends to be associated with a very specific focused task that someone would be doing.
Yeah.
But if you think about those waves that are there, and I oversimplify stuff for myself to remember sometimes, but I think about like sleep and the really long, slow, just like I'm not moving at all while I sleep waves that are there relative to the even just going to the beta waves that were shown in the picture of, I'm going through my daily and my brain needs to be active for, even just what direction am I going, or if something, pops up and is scary, or if it's just I'm in class paying attention, whatever the case is.
Yeah.
But then if we think about sleep, what if, again, I'm not getting enough sleep? And while I'm in class or going to class or whatever, but let's stick with the in class, I want to have beta waves. And my brain is like, please, theta or delta waves is where, maybe not even that extreme, but alpha or theta is where I'd like to be.
Yeah.
Well, then now as I often hear from students, I kind of like zone out. I don't really get what they, are going through and so on. It's like, yeah. And especially depending what your class is like, if it's a 3-hour class versus a 1-hour class, right? That's a long time to be focused. And the whole time your brain is like, but I want to re-energize. I want to repair. Let's move to alpha and theta instead of beta, I should say, right? And so then that's something to think about in terms of, am I getting enough sleep? What's the importance of this?
Yeah.
Sometimes in terms of those, and we kind of alluded to it before, we have that culture of like, sleep later, right? I don't know if you've ever heard someone say it, I'll sleep when I die.
Sleep when I'm dead, sleep when I die.
But in a way, what I shared before the break is like, but it's leading to the death because you're not sleeping in terms of the increase in stroke, increase in cognitive heart failure, etc., right? And so it's one of those things that, as we already mentioned, your brain is using a lot of energy. It needs that rest just like the rest of your body does. And I came across an interesting study that was more, kind of telling of how much rest we're actually tend to be getting. It was a poll where 40% of adults report falling asleep during the day without meaning to. Not I'm a little bit ill and I'm going to have a nap because my I'm sitting here one moment and I'm asleep the next moment. And it said once per month, 40% of adults say that they fall asleep without meaning to.
Yeah.
And I think the other times are, that they just don't remember falling asleep because, no, I'm just kidding. But that's a lot of time where it tells you something about, am I getting enough rest overall, right? If the majority of us at times are falling asleep when we don't even mean to, right? And so, there's an impact in terms of not getting enough sleep on the physiology and the physiology in terms of these waves and the hormones going on and so on. And we end up sort of building up what's called sleep debt, right? Like I just said, I fall asleep without really intending to because my body is like, you owe me sort of thing, right? So beyond the physiology of the body and so on, does it play a role in terms of our mental health not getting enough sleep?
Yeah. And this kind of links to that idea I've been saying earlier about sleep is a chemical process, right? And so sleep debt is like a credit card. So I hear students say, well, I'm staying up late tonight. I'm losing a few hours of sleep. And so we end up paying a lot of interest because it's very cumulative. And it's not as simple as saying, well, I lost 3 hours of sleep last night, and so I'll sleep 3 hours more tomorrow morning. This really kind of sets off that chemistry. This formula that you talked about is important for kind of this full day idea. We talked last week a little bit about the circadian, am I saying that correctly? Circadian clock. And so all of these things are connected. And sleep research is currently showing us that adults need on average 7 to 9 hours of sleep each night. Anything less than 7 hours will start to accumulate this debt. We start to kind of tap with our credit card, right? Now, some people notice, though, they don't feel tired at 9 p.m., 10 p.m., and tend to be more creative and productive at night. Craig, have you heard of that term, early bird or a night owl?
For sure.
Yeah, what would you say you lean more towards?
I would say an early bird, though my thoughts on it have changed over time, but ultimately I'm
a bit of an early bird.
Yeah, early bird.
Have you heard of the bear, wolf, dolphin, and lion?
No, I have not.
Ooh, well, let me introduce you to chronotypes. So a chronotype is a classification system used to help us understand sleep and productivity schedules. So when you're most active and alert throughout the day, our body's kind of biological clock. So it's not just personal preference, but it's based on our body's natural activity, alertness, and rest rhythms. So more research is needed, but current understanding point to it being genetically preconditioned, the PER3 gene that defines circadian patterns. So we have an image here on the chronotypes, and this is based on studies by a psychologist and board-certified clinical sleep specialist, Michael Burris. And he has a book, The Power of When, Discovering Your Chronotype and the Best Time to Eat Lunch, Ask for a Raise, Have Sex, Write a Novel, Take Your Meds, and more. So in this image, you can see the 4 chronotypes. So we have a lion, a dolphin, a bear, and a wolf. So the lion, this is your rise early in the morning, wind down early in the evening. Our dolphins tend to have trouble following any type of sleep schedule, a little bit more sensitive to sound, more productive in the late morning, early afternoon. Bears, this is the most common type. We sleep and wake with the sun, and so we kind of rise a little bit earlier, go to bed a little bit earlier. Our wolves, and this is what I am, we have trouble waking in the morning. We prefer to sleep till noon, and we feel really energetic in the early afternoon and get a bit of an energy boost late evening around 6 p.m. as well. So our society is set up for bears, but here at Durham College, we have some classes that go till 9 p.m. We have many individuals working shift work or part-time jobs. Socializing tends to be a little bit more later in the evening. We have kind of this late night social culture. So it's hard for us to align our body's natural rhythms. And so we tend to go into sleep debt a lot. I start work at a certain hour, and so we can't sometimes adjust our environment to match that chronotype. And so when our clock is off, we're going to notice some impacts to our mental health. Quality sleep is crucial for good mental health, but sleep issues can worsen with mental health conditions, and mental health problems can lead to poor sleep. We used to not recognize this, but it is a bi-directional relationship. We used to think you just kind of got bad sleep if you lived with a mental health concern, but we now understand that poor sleep can actually lead to a decline in our mental health. Research is discovering that it can be especially harmful for consolidating positive emotional content. So it can really influence our mood and emotional reactivity. That saying, waking up on the bad side, wrong side of the bed, there's some truth here backed by research. And also thing to add here kind of connects to that conversation of why we sleep. Some research is exploring that a main function of sleep is in our amygdala regulation. So we've talked about our little friend, the amygdala, before in the past. So this little part of our brain that really helps us with that fear response and controlling our reactions when we face a threat or stress. When we get enough sleep, our amygdala can respond in a more adaptive way. But if you're sleep deprived, in sleep debt, this amygdala is going to overreact. So we might notice when we're feeling a little bit exhausted, we're a little bit sharper, we're a little bit spikier. So we aim for 7 to 9 hours, but we can see we each have a unique pull, being a wolf or a bear, and we can easily start to rack up that sleep credit card. We know there's an impact on mental health, but we've talked a little bit about learning today as well, Craig. What implications does sleep, melatonin, have when it comes to our learning?
I think there's a few aspects there, and I hadn't sort of planned on this, but I think because of what you were sharing about the bears and the dolphins and so on, and just that am I a morning person, night owl sort of thing, and some of my own experiences. But sometimes there's that aspect of, well, like you said, there seems to be some evidence that like you're kind of born that way, maybe some genetics there or whatever the case is, but sometimes we don't always have an awareness of it as well. So to organize my thoughts here, like thinking about taking advantage of which that you are, as much as it can be a challenge. Like you said, if you're more of a night owl and you have early morning classes because that's what your schedule has been told to you, that can definitely be a challenge. But then when am I reviewing the material and so on, right? Then that's important to take advantage of. And that's where, kind of overlapping with my own story, if you will, as a morning person, it was, but I went to university. I roomed with some of my close friends there. They were more night owls and stayed up at night, so I would stay up at night as well. And then it'd be kind of the, no, I better go back and study because I have some stuff coming up. And it was almost like useless because I can stay up decently late, all your 7 to 9 hours. I'm like, I'm not, I can stay up late, but I can't really be doing stuff like studying and so on and attempting to retain it. And I realized that, yes, I could hang out with my friends in the evening, but I needed to then get to bed at a decent hour, based on my brain and body's needs here. But is like, then I should get up in the morning, not crazy early, but like go up onto campus and study. Right. And as much as that's during, when I was going to school, same thing. I tend to, okay, let me come into work a little bit earlier to get myself set up for the day and have a bit of time to sort of not necessarily get going because I'm tired, but get my brain, okay, what do I have to do? What's coming up? And so on. Right. And so as much as I'm speaking, personally, it is something of like, it's related to learning in the sense of take advantage of the time that works best for you, as opposed to doing something that's frustrating and you're like, I just spent 3 hours studying and it was a complete waste of time, or I set my alarm to get up for 5 a.m. because I'm going to go and study, and then I hit snooze and like, oh no, I've failed at my goal already and it's first thing of the day kind of thing, right? But then it is important, beyond that, as we were alluding to earlier, while we're resting, while we're specifically sleeping, what's going on? Our brain is making connections. As I said earlier, what I'll say to students, like, you do some of your best learning while you sleep because your brain is saying, what was important from the day? What stuck out? And so on, right? So as much as there's other study strategies and so on involved, but like, coming back to studying, every day, every few days, right? Depending on when you last looked at the material. But then our brain is saying, oh, hey, this is important. Craig keeps coming back to this. I should remember this. And then in addition to sleep, when it's saying, what should I remember from the day, as much as I'm oversimplifying, when it's doing that pruning and connecting, like you mentioned earlier, a lot of that is happening in the end while we sleep, right? And so it's definitely, definitely important to think, what works best for me? When am I most successful? And then how do I adapt, even if I don't have the schedule I want, but how do I adapt my schedule as best I can in order to take advantage of that and learn the best that I can?
Great strategy.
Yeah.
More on biohacking with sleep hygiene back here on riotradio.ca after this quick break. Welcome back to the WellPod at DC, live from the Media Hub on riotradio.ca. So what happens if you find yourself singing the Beastie Boys' 1986 hit anthem, No Sleep Till Brooklyn? So we're going to explore some different areas of biohacking. So check out in a few weeks, we're going to do part 2, where we really break down some of those different tips and strategies to support your sleep. But our student question of the week asked a little bit about the melatonin gummies that we're seeing on our shelves. And so a couple of things that we wanted to highlight here with melatonin is the global market for melatonin. Craig, if you had to guess, how much do you think it's worth?
I might have seen it before you put your hand over. Sorry.
In 2012, it was worth $504 million.
Wow.
In 2024, it's now worth $2.84 billion. So the melatonin supplement industry is massive, but the Journal of American Medical Association in April 2023 found that only 12% of the sampled melatonin gummy products had around 10% in range of what was advertised on their package. Some contained up to 347 more melatonin, and some had zero melatonin in it and actually had just things like CBD or other compounds.
Wow.
So there's been a massive increase in accidental ingestion. The U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention reported about 5,000 ER visits in 2019 to 2022. So really important to speak to your healthcare provider. Large doses of melatonin can cause GO upsets and irritability and can really disrupt this kind of natural ability that we've been talking about to produce melatonin. And so if this is something that you're interested in, you see it on the shelves at Walmart or it's in your cart for Amazon, really important to speak to your healthcare provider. And it's not getting necessarily to the root. So just because we're popping that gummy at bedtime, we still need to explore other sleep hygiene to really have a long-term effect in a positive way to our health. So check that out. In part 2, we're going to do a deep dive in some different biohacking tips for our sleep. This is the end of our show today. Resources mentioned will be on our Instagram at wellness@DC. And if you're hungry for more, next week we're talking about hormones that fuel our appetite. We're talking body image and nourishment with special guest Michelle Pittman. Don't forget you can follow the DCSA Media Hub on social media at DCSA Media Hub. Thanks for exploring what it means to be well, and we'll see you back here on riotradio.ca.